everything carbon and carbon credits and things you need to know. I'm gonna let these guys introduce themselves once we get the chairs up here. We need 5 chairs.
Five. Are you
Five.
gonna sit down? I'm gonna take the podium. You sit here.
All right, who wants to go first? I'll let you start off and you can introduce.
Well, thanks for letting me come back up here and speak. Again, I'm Dave Both. I'm with the Good Grazing Makes Sense program through the Society for Rangeland Management. This next panel is a little more in our regular wheelhouse. We're going to talk about some good rangeland practices, which is what we preach all the time. But we're going to do a pretty deep dive into the carbon market and how you can possibly get paid for those, get paid extra for those good practices you guys do out on the range. So what we did was bring 4 experts in. We got 2 aggregators, we got 1 researcher and 1 lawyer. And I'll let you figure out who's who.
Hi, I'm Breck Monks. I am carbon science agronomist with the Agoro Carbon Alliance. I'm part of the science team. I've been with them for 2 years, and we have a grasslands program directed directly at ranchers and utilizing 3 different management practices, improved grazing, biodiversity, and the utilization of end to store carbon in your ground that you're already managing. And we do enroll people on a 10-year contract.
Hello, I'm Anna Claire Molazan. I have a background in animal sciences and ecosystem science and sustainability, focusing on rangeland ecology and grazing systems, so the animal-land interface. I work as an independent research scientist as well as a consultant and facilitator. I'm a rancher myself. My husband and I have a small operation in the high mountains in Colorado. And so I do a lot of translational work, facilitation work between ranchers and science and academia, basically. I come into the carbon market space with 3 different kinds of diverse experience. One is working with a new program that it will end up being a beef label called Grazewell. It's being developed by Country Natural Beef and Sustainable Northwest. And that is a program where it is a practice-based and outcome-based kind of value-added program. It's one way of looking at environmental markets and adding value to what you're doing. The other one is working for a research project of the United States Department of Energy, where who in here has heard of agrivoltaics? Putting livestock like sheep and cattle maybe under solar panels. So that's coming your way one day soon, that entire world. And so we're doing some of the research on that and developing a carbon protocol that will be specific to those kinds of systems. So putting grazing animals on solar plants, basically. The other one is that I work as an associate with a company called Creek Bank Associates, which is a group of independent advisors and experts that specifically helps landowners navigate understanding the risks and the rewards of environmental markets, with lots of flexibility and assistance in navigating that entire Wild West, which can kind of be looked at as the new gold rush in a way. But that's my experience, and I'm here to help answer any questions.
Afternoon, my name's Anson Howard, and appreciate y'all having us this afternoon. It's been great to get to know some of y'all's members in the group, and really great presentations, lots of interesting information. So by day, I'm an attorney at Wolf Fitzsimmons in San Antonio, a law firm that represents landowners for all issues concerning real property. So a lot of eminent domain, oil and gas, now solar, wind, and increasingly carbon, both soil and geologic, so carbon capture and underground storage. And by night, early mornings, weekends, I operate my family's ranch in Tom Creek County. And what I love about my practice is the overlap between issues I'm dealing with on the ranch and issues that my clients are dealing with. And nowhere has that been more true than in the soil carbon storage space, where 3 years ago, as a result of our grazing practices, we were approached to do a soil carbon storage contract. So looked at the contract, was like, all right, I get what y'all are trying to do here. The legal terms are terrible, so I'm gonna redline the heck out of this thing, send it back to y'all. And we were able to work out a pretty good soil carbon storage contract. So since then, I've been then some friends found out that I did that, and they asked me to represent for that. And now I've been representing landowners all over the US and northern Mexico for these soil carbon storage contracts. So really excited to hear y'all's questions and share what we've learned having looked at a lot of these contracts.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Hunter Jones. I'm with Grassroots Carbon. We are a San Antonio, Texas-based carbon company. We work with ranchers that are existing regenerative grazers, rotational grazers, that have been doing it for a long time. And then we also have a pipeline for people that are new, getting into it, need some capital. We have 2 different contracts, 2 different terms, helping ranchers get into it or paying you for what you're already doing. I am a local guy. This is home for me. About 20 miles from here, we run a cow-calf operation as well. Sell boxed beef locally. Luckily, we are close enough to DFW that we have the population to support everything that we sell. Have a master's degree from Sul Ross State University out in Alpine, and in animal science and biotechnology. So, yeah, like I said, carbon company, here to help ranchers answer any questions. Yeah.
Well, now we know who the players are, who's writing checks and who's charging you money.
I will add one thing. I am not on the science team. I run the sales team for Grassroots Carbon, so we will deflect the science questions as I will deflect them as much as I can. So
Deflect them, just make them up.
yeah.
So talking about legal stuff, that reminds me, I got an urgent message to make sure I remind everybody that SRM is not, the Society for Range Management is not endorsing any one particular brand of carbon marketing, but we're just putting experts together so ranchers have an idea of how to approach this thing if they so. As we do this is meant to be a pretty informal situation. This is to answer your questions about carbon and carbon market. So as you get those questions, just shout them out. Facebook Live is doing the same. Any questions to start with right away after you heard who we're talking to?
I got a question.
There you go.
You talked about grazing under solar panels.
Yes.
What is the effect of the solar panels in shading grass, and how much grass do you actually wind up with, in that particular plot?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and there's really great research happening on that. So we have some.
You requested for the Facebook, I think we need to talk.
I'll repeat the question. Repeat the question.
Please.
So the question was on a solar plant, so in an agrivoltaic system where you're growing forage or growing feed, right, for grazing animals, and you're grazing animals. The question was, what does the shading do to the productivity of the forage, and does it balance out? And if you're going to have the same amount of production, right, the same amount of feed as you would if you didn't have the solar panels there. Is that accurate?
Pretty close, yeah.
Pretty close. Okay. What part did I miss? Do I need to?
Well, actually, I don't think you missed much of anything.
Okay.
I was just wondering about productivity
Yeah.
on that stuff afterwards, and do the animals gain from the shade of that?
Right, do the animals gain from the shade? Yeah. So what we're learning is actually really exciting about, so we're studying, and other studies have looked at the productivity of the vegetation. So you're getting the same amount of pounds per acre, for example, on a solar plant than you would if you were just in an open pasture. So for that part of the question, what we're seeing is a little bit of reduced production right under the panels where they're the most shaded, but we're seeing increased production, in between, because there's partial shade, and especially in more arid or dry environments, or where if you're experiencing drought or a dry period of the year, one thing that we're learning is that there's reduced evaporation. It's as if you have like a savanna or a silvopasture where you've got some tree cover and some meadow and some pasture. That canopy, that solar panel canopy is actually reducing the amount of water you're losing to the air. So your soil is staying more moist, your soil is actually staying cooler. And in the end, the amount of production of your forage is balancing itself out. So there's not significant reduction in the amount of feed you're able to produce. And of course, this is going to be region dependent and plant dependent. But in the regions where this is being studied, there isn't an issue or significant reduction of feed. If anything, you're getting a longer growing period. If you're in a really hot and arid environment, you're getting more productivity perhaps. On the animal side of things, we are seeing that their animals are gravitating to where there's shade, just like they do in any other kind of pasture system. So they actually utilize the panels for shade and like to spend time. Cattle will like to spend time under the panels when they're not out grazing.
So then you're gonna have good and bad. And I was thinking about would you gain any runoff from dew? And then, of course, you have the trampling effect underneath the solar panel from animals going into the shade.
Yeah, right. You're thinking of it in all the right ways. I don't want to hijack the carbon conversation, but how about we talk more about the agrivoltaics thing right after. I will speak to this though really quickly. That the panels, like you're saying, are going to affect the water runoff. They create what we call drip edges. So when the panels are tilted this way and it rains, you're going to get a concentrated amount of water falling to that side, right? And so there is this dynamic pattern that's happening on that grid of those rows of solar arrays. And that's exactly what we're studying and what other researchers are studying. And I would say that there's not enough research out there enough results out there yet to understand clearly, but we are seeing specific water patterns happening, but nothing so far that I know of about any negative effects of like concentrated trampling or anything under the panels compared to between the panels, for example. So we're still in the learning phase.
But one of the things I like best about being the moderator is I get to ask any stupid question I want whenever.
There's one over there.
All
I'm
right.
dying over here, I'm dying. Just count 'em off in the house, so I'm finally gonna speak up. Okay, so where are you doing these studies?
The agrivoltaic studies.
Yes.
Yes, so Georgia,
Okay,
Arizona,
okay.
Michigan, Colorado. These are not just my studies, but these are where a lot of the big studies are happening.
Okay, so none in Texas.
I'm not sure. I don't know of any, but there is a really big use of sheep grazing on Texas solar plants.
Okay,
So
there's
I-
also a lot of not. So my husband happens to be the surveyor and the CAD supervisor for solar farms. And when they come in, they're taking 12 to 18 inches of topsoil off, filling it with caliche and putting the solar panels so low that you could never graze anything, even goats underneath them. And then it's a bunch of metal that's not useful. And then it's gonna be 20 years before you could, take that out, replenish that land, bring in soil again so that we could actually use that land. So
Yeah,
you might wanna let somebody know that they need to get down to Texas, because we're not happy about it.
oh, I wouldn't be happy either.
I hear what you're saying, and that sounds like, oh, just so nice, and it creates shade and it creates moisture, and that's not what's happening.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
there might be some like that, but ouch, yeah, we're not happy.
Right. Yeah,
reclamation into those contracts?
Yeah, so what I'll say is I'll put on the attorney hat, because we represent landowners for solar contracts all the time. And that's 100% with that landowner that's negotiating that. So obviously the solar company, they're gonna do what they want when they want. But as a landowner, you have the ability to control that. Nobody's forcing you to enroll in a solar contract, or sorry, in a solar lease. And so when that, I've had landowners that said, no, I just want maximum compensation. I don't care about any agrivoltaic grazing. I've had other landowners that say, no, I will take less compensation, or I will give up some other terms in order to ensure that we can agrivoltaically graze. And so that is 100% an independent sort of private property rights decision.
And I understand what you're saying, and you're exactly right. However, that's not what's being presented to landowners, when they're going and snatching all that up to put solar panels up. They're not representing, they're saying, yes, you can graze this, and it's beautiful, and it's fantastic, and it keeps moisture in, and all that, and then that's, I understand what you're saying, but there's a disconnect there between the landowner, the legality of it, what they do have a choice and what they don't have a choice, and what's actually going in. And then what the outcome is after they've already been put in. So we're kind of stuck with a bunch of these people that now they know that that's not maybe what they would have chosen. They're stuck with it, and then they're looking at 15 to 20 to get it back to being any kind of a productive land usage. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up to the table.
That's too bad. That, and no,
Yeah,
that's not good for anybody. Yeah.
So this came up in the last time we did this, and we often referred back to the lawyer. So I'm just gonna ask right now, when does the lawyer get involved when we start these things? When should the lawyer get involved?
Earlier the better.
More billing hours.
It's funny, yeah, so, okay, does that create more billable hours? Well, it actually creates less. Like, if I look at the projects that I was brought in on the tail end of, it's like, oh my goodness, it's a situation like you just described, which is, oh, hey, we just got to the end of this thing, and we just realized we couldn't agrivoltaically graze our property, or in this case, we're talking solar carbon storage contracts. So we just got to the end of this, and we realized that it's actually going to be a 40-year contract, or the contract actually doesn't have an indemnity provision, whatever it is. Now, all of a sudden, I am stuck unwinding, months or years of representations between the landowner and between in most cases, the broker on it. And I've had long-term clients where they brought stuff to me at the end of something, and then I represent them on the next thing. And literally the cost was half or less, and the time was half or less to get there. It's like, oh, wait, if we bring you in the beginning, everybody knows what we're trying to do, and we can very expeditiously accomplish that versus coming in at the end and basically having to unwind everything.
I can see that.
So I have a question for the grassroots carbon. Since you're the salesman here. Right, yep, okay, so I would like to hear a little bit more about, now I understand that you're paying these ranchers for doing what they're already doing, the intensive grazing, the rotational grazing. Can you add a little bit more light into what that, I assume you're signing a contract with them? Yeah, correct? Yes. Okay, so can you add a little bit more? What does that contract entail? How long of a contract are we talking about? Are you a for-profit organization? I mean, because obviously we're looking at it, okay, there's gotta be something in it for you, correct? So just, can you?
Yeah, so our contract for our existing landowner, or not existing landowners, that's a bad way to put it. For people that have been doing rotational grazing for say more than 2 years. We have a 15-year contract. It's 5 years. Every year 1, we do a baseline measurement. Year 5, we measure again to see the increase in carbon. That's what we pay off of. Years 1 through 4, we're paying conservatively on a soil model. So whatever the model can spit out, saying whatever your property can accrue in a year per acre per ton, whatever it is, we're paying conservatively on that. And then you can renew every 5 years if you would like, continue sampling. If you don't want to renew, then you're sent a 10-year storage agreement. So every year that we sell a carbon credit, they have to stay in the ground for 10 years. Permanence is a big word you'll hear in carbon. Permanence drives the price of credits, how long they're in the ground. So, year one, we sell a carbon credit, it has to stay in the ground till year 11 of the contract. So
that means you can't change what you're doing, basically, right, with the land? I mean, if it's gotta stay.
yeah, so in terms of additionality, that's what we're an additionality contract, paying you for additional practices. So say you're already rotational grazing, we have a list of about 15 things that you pick 3 of to implement over 5 years. And it's not all things that are going to break the bank, it's reduce herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, reducing your bale grazing, go to continuing education classes, implement amp grazing, things like that. So people that have already been doing this fit into that contract really well, and we can always find additional practices or changes for you to implement. So when you get to the end of the 5 year after we measure, you're in that 10-year storage term. Basically, all we're saying is don't turn over the soil, kill the live roots, and release the carbon. So there's no more management practices required for you to submit to us, but we are going to monitor and make sure that the soil hasn't been turned over, things like that. Does that answer part of your question?
Yeah.
We are a public benefit company, so for profit. I don't know not the legal expert on it, but we have an 80-20 split with our landowners. So after the cost of soil sampling is paid back from the credit sales, you get 80%, we keep 20. So I can come and talk.
So before we turn it to Laurel to kind of answer the same question, when it comes to these management actions that trigger the payment, what happens if that management action is just not working for you? Year 3 turns out cross fencing doesn't work for you.
Yeah. I don't know where that, did I turn this off? Whoa. Yeah, so, say we get to year 5 and you pick the practice that doesn't work. I'm sure there's wiggle room, legal aspect. Anson may be able to answer that better, but, we don't want to ever get to a spot to where someone would owe us money back. But we're not in the game of getting money back from ranchers. That's not what we're here for.
Get the lawyer involved.
Get the lawyer involved. Know these questions before you sign a contract. So.
Is there different lengths of contracts?
Yes. So we offer 2 different contracts in-house. Their contract length, I'll let her answer as well, different than their contract different than ours. So we offer the 5-year plus 10-year permanent, so 15-year. We also have a 30-year that we haven't announced officially yet, but it'll be out hopefully by the 1st. That'll be a 30-year contract. Payments are 30 years, sampling every 5. But it'll be 2 different types of credits, for the regenerative standard versus a card credit. So there's different registries and Vera, B carbon, things like that. So yeah.
How would a drought affect your carbon credit?
So I'll answer for us, then she can answer. Drought, we do meter deep core samples. We do meter deep core samples for a reason. Drought, affecting the top 10 inches possibly? I don't know for sure. I'm not a scientist, but in our contract, you are protected by drought, wildfire, Yellowstone volcano for some of y'all pretty close.
Toast anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. Here, Anson's gonna get this.
Goes back to the contract. So each contract's different. I mean, that's what's important to remember in these soil carbon storage contracts. I hear all the time, landowners going to be, oh, well, such and such carbon company told me this, so I'm not eligible for a carbon contract. Wait, stop. That's one group that told you that. There are 5 other groups out there that have used completely different standards that are set up, have a different contract. So just because we were talking about this earlier. It's like a lot of producers out there, they want to find no on these and they just, oh yeah, I looked at it, nope, can't do it. Okay, so I'm not going to look at these anymore. That's fine. If you don't want to do it, don't waste your time on it. But if you want to, there's a contract, what I found is there is a contract that can work for you. My first rule is, an attorney is, if the group's not willing to negotiate their contract and have reasonable terms with you, stop. We don't need to waste any more time. Don't hire me, because if they're not gonna negotiate their terms, I'm worthless. But all that back to your question about drought, specific, when I negotiate contract lead in drought, it's my big deal. You see a lot of these contracts that say, oh, they're gonna keep going until you store the amount of carbon they projected you were gonna store. Stop, that's ridiculous. The science is way too new, way too undetermined on soil carbon to know if we're actually gonna store any carbon or not. So to me, that's the equivalent of an oil and gas lease in Hawaii saying the oil and gas lease is gonna last until you produce 1 million barrels of oil from this land. Okay, well, we're gonna be waiting, since there are no more dinosaurs to die and turn to oil, we're gonna wait till all of us die in 1 million years and turn to oil. And then you'll finally fulfill the terms of that contract. That doesn't work. So instead, my deal is contract ends on a set date that complies with the term. And if there's drought or some other, force majeure clause, natural, act of God that comes into play, great. Then if the landowner and the broker want to extend that contract to have another measuring term, then that can be negotiated by a separate written agreement. But the contract just isn't going to continue indefinitely until the drought breaks and nose flood shows up and we're out of a drought. Because now are we going to define a drought? How are we going to define a drought? Good.
I want to say one little thing, and then you have to have a chance to chime in.
We need more lawyers.
I wanted to say that the question of drought is also a bigger question about what can we not, what is out of our control that's gonna be a risk for us, right? And in ranching, everybody knows that Mother Nature is, the upper hand is hers, right? So there are many things we can't control, and especially in long-term planning, 5 years, 10 years, what if there's a drought? What if there's a fire? So I would recommend, there's so many different scenarios to hypothesize about. Make sure you've got someone on your team at your table who's helping you look through all of those scenarios and protect yourself. So it's about reducing your risk and the what ifs, and get advisors and experts on your team for that.
That was a super long mic handoff.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. That was a long way to get down to the end. So I'm just gonna repeat it and simplify the question. I think, how do landowners get paid?
Excellent. So we have a 10-year contract. We offer both row crop and grasslands at Agaro. You can sign up for multiple practices on your land, or you can sign up for just one of them. There's front-loaded payments similar to grasslands to help you either implement these or implement something else on your land if you needed that capital. We do sampling 3 times during that contract period, and that's soil data, and we have to do it all third party. And that's deemed by our registry, Vera. And so we have to keep our hands off of the soil sampling as well as the soil analysis, so our credits are worth more. So there's no greenwashing involved. Through that, we will monitor your soil carbon storage, and we also utilize models in order to get that done for these front load payments similar to grassroots. So we will pay you upfront based on what practice you sign up for and what your land is potentially capable of doing based on the soil profile and your previous practices. The other situation is that we do look at your baseline data, how you used to manage your land, and we do ask for yearly management records. And that goes directly back to your question of what if we do have an act of God in which we cannot control. If you have done the practices in which you have said you would sign up for, and there is a drought, a wildfire, God forbid, a massive snowstorm that caused you to have to get rid of half of your herd or whatever, you've done everything you possibly can, and you can prove that to us, so you don't owe us money in the end, which is really important. At the end, so essentially we do a baseline soil sampling, we do another soil sampling at year 5, and if you're not accruing carbon at that juncture, you have another 5 years in order to take that up and potentially accrue it. If at the end of that 10-year contract, you haven't accrued that, and you didn't necessarily take front-loaded payments, you don't owe us anything. If you did take front-loaded payments and the carbon you did accrue doesn't pay for that, then we'll have that conversation. But we are similar to grassroots, not looking for you to pay us back by any means. We want to give you money to essentially increase soil health, to produce the longevity of your agricultural production, not only for food production, but also for your families in the long run. And just to back this up, anytime anybody in this room gets into a contract and you're confused about it, hire someone like Anson, because he knows his stuff and they're there to help us out. So don't enter into a contract you may or may not be confused by.
Do you take a core sample before you sign the contract?
So contracts are signed and then we come do core samples. We do have a 3-year look back period. And so if you implemented something, let's say in the last year, like you changed your rotational grazing period, we have the ability to back model in order to account for that.
Do you core sample every soil type?
So each type of core sampling is, how, do you core sample in each type of soil? We don't necessarily look at soil type that's factored in. We utilize a stratification method that takes in not only base SOC, but elevation, texture, soil type, and we do very specific models based off of our stratification. And so everything does get sampled, but like a field in some places of the United States can have 25 different types of soil. And so we have assessed for that and we sample based on that.
So where's the glacial area and we have that?
Yes.
Yeah, question here?
Yeah, so in addition to my job as a cattlewoman, I do work in farm stress and farmer mental health. And part of that, we do a lot of work promoting succession planning and estate planning with our farmers. So what do these contracts look like if a farmer enters into this contract, then the person who picks up the succession plan either does or does not want to further engage in these contracts? Are the contracts on the land or are they with the farmer, and do they die with the farmer?
Okay, so for Agoro, with our 10-year contract, you have the ability to pass that contract on to your leasee or your child, and you can sign it over.
Can they decline that? Like, can that leasee or can that child decline that opportunity once it's presented to them?
They don't necessarily decline it, but it doesn't go with the land.
So can they terminate it? Essentially, it can be terminated. But if we had front-loaded money, you owe us that money if you sell at year 4 and there were no soil samples done.
Yeah, very similar. So our contracts are assumable by the new landowner, lessee, tenant. It's basically as long as the land is going to maintain production, maintain the good standing of the contract, there's no money owed back. But if you breach the contract, that is about the only time that we are gonna ever talk about getting a payment back. Yeah.
We got another, oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So to make it pretty simple, I feel like everybody gets really confused on this carbon space. And they'll start asking questions that are way at the bottom, like, wait, stop. Are you even eligible for a carbon contract? And so I sort of, when I give my presentation, I've got 23 points. And if we can't pass one, we're not going to 2. And so the first one is your land actually right for a soil carbon storage contract? And what that means is look, so there's Agoro's contract's 10 years, Grassroots is 5. That's actually wrong. Theirs is 15, theirs is 30. And the reason for that is because there's the actual contract period and then there's the storage term, the permanence. So what that means is, hey, if I'm planning on developing my property for solar or for a Walmart, whatever it is, if you are going to destroy that soil horizon and you're planning on doing that anytime, and the shortest contract out there for soil carbon storage I've seen is 15 years, it's Grassroots. So if you're planning on doing that anytime in 15 years with a Grassroots contract or 30 years with an Agoro contract, then you don't need to be in a soil carbon storage contract, because that means you're going to be getting out of that contract, which means we're going to be terminating it and have to pay back all this mess. So in terms of succession planning, though, the question is all right, if with Grassroots or with either of them, it's that initial, you have to do the practices during that 5 or 10 years to store it. And then after that, you just have to not destroy the carbon. So as long as whoever's taking over the property is good with doing the practices for 5 or 10 years, then hey, we can go down to question number 2. Then the next question, probably on any property that you have, unless it's going to be developed, they're not going to destroy the soil. They're not going to turn over that soil. So then the storage term that either 10 years on the grassroots contract or 20 years on a Goro contract isn't as much of an issue. But to answer your question, at the end of the day, yes, that contract runs with the land. And if you want to get out of it, you're paying back whoever your soil carbon storage contracts with.
Right, and again, we're dealing with farmers that think that they're gonna live forever, and then whenever their kids come along, they're not understanding what contracts mom and dad signed on, and so, again, I see that as an issue that I don't really know how to fix, but again, we as new landowners that are taking on the things of our parents, it's
Yeah, it's almost like a CRP contract, so that
and
you're locked up.
I hope that there's conversation within y'all's organizations that whenever you are entering into contracts with a farmer who's 50 years old, that's a 25-year contract, that you're having those conversations of, is your son, is your daughter, or your grandchildren going to go into this contract?
That happens every day for me at least. 15-year contract for a 75-year-old adult is an eternity almost. So that conversation does happen. I will say that.
Thank
That
you.
was a nice way to put it.
Yeah.
Along those same lines, with a lot of us lease and rent ground, how have you seen that work? I mean, are these contracts just with the landowner, or are they with the producer, or do we have to have leases for that period of time? What does that look like?
Yeah, so on our contracts, the contract is with the operator, the land steward. If you are leasing the ground, we just ask for the landowner to sign the land use acknowledgement stating that, Joe Rancher has permission to be on the property for X amount of years. If not, they're on the hook for firing them and not maintaining storage.
So even if it's a federal lease, then the same question.
Yes.
So Goro doesn't do anything federally. Within our contract, we ask for a vested interest by lessees or land stewards that they will have that land for 10 years.
Mary's got one.
Yeah.
I will say, for those of y'all out west, there are some groups I've worked with that do federal, but there's really only one. Actually, now there are 2 on rangelands.
So what is a typical payment, minimum to maximum per acre? How do you do that?
It depends. $4 to $25 an acre, give or take. It just depends on where you're at, what you're doing.
Flat for every year, like just a flat rate. You sign up for something, you get it that one
Yeah.
time.
So for us, we're gonna pay you on modeled credits, years 1 through 4. Year 1, you're gonna carry the expense of, we're both going to carry the expense of soil sampling before we have our 80-20 split. So year 1's generally a smaller payment. Year 2 has very little cost associated with it. But it depends. Someone might be able to answer.
Right, I'll let you take a shot at it.
So, Goro covers costs, soil sampling, so that's never front loaded to the producer. Between our payment structure, it can go anywhere from $16.50 a ton to up to $20 a ton, depending on our payment structure. And that, if we do something similar, like grassroots do, we do front loaded payments 1 through 4. And that's a yearly check, like on an anniversary date. Otherwise, it's payments associated with what you accrue at year 5, and then at the end of our 10-year cycle, just like the beginning of year 11. And that is based on a ton of carbon per acre.
Yeah. Current, I don't like saying current market price, but because there's not a set market, but
Yeah, you'll see. So it all goes back to credit. So why are we doing this? Well, let's get rid of some misconceptions real quick. 1, this is not government mandated. This is purely free market capitalism that's mandating this, except for California, which has a cap and trade, and Europe, which has cap and trade. So where it's free market, not government mandated, you see the price of carbon around $25 a metric ton. every $25 a credit. Over in Europe, it's closer to $80. That's because it's government mandated. Or there's a cap and trade system. So part of that, in this free market system, it's measured based on a credit. So you've got all these companies, right, that want their ESG points and they want to have a good ESG, environmental social governance score. And so they go get carbon credits to offset their carbon emissions. The price that we're seeing, like I said, is around $25 a metric ton or $25 per credit. Then your question went back to acres. So how do we translate that to acres? All right, well, has to do based on the soil scientist is not going to like this, but I like to make things a little simple. So we got three things. We've got our environment. So what our rainfall is, we've got our soil type, neither one of which we can control. And then we've got the third thing, which is our grazing management or the land management, what we do with the soil. And that's what we can control. And that's where the credits are generated, why there's additionality and all that. So you get sort of 98th meridian, 100th meridian, you get east of there, we're going to be stored, the models are upwards of 1 metric ton of carbon stored per acre per year. You get west of there, it starts dropping off. So for example, where we are in Tom Green County, so 3 hours southwest of here, they guesstimate that we're going to store 0.6 metric tons of carbon per acre per year. Well, you put that onto pricing. So grassroots pricing model is the landowner gets, after net of measurement costs, the landowner gets 80% of that. So they're selling it for $25 per metric ton. You subtract out the cost, it ends up being about $18 that the landowner is getting per credit. But then you roll that back to per acre and it ends up closer to like $12 per acre, $10 to $12 per acre per year. If you want to average it out. So the way I equate it is it's like an okay hunting lease is the way it looks at it. That's sort of metric one for pricing. Metric two is you get paid a set amount per ton that you store of carbon, so per credit that you store, and that amount's locked in, which is really terrible. That'd be like agreeing to a oil and gas lease where they say, okay, we're going to pay you, $20 per barrel of oil, no matter whether oil's $100 or $150. And then the third model is we're just going to pay you per acre that you sign up. And that's also pretty bad because that goes back to, you're set, you're fixed. You don't get to participate in any of the upside. Also, you don't participate in any downside, but we have yet to, this market's so new and the demand for these credits is exponentially greater than the supply. So, when you're signing up for a 5-year, there's no reason to sign up for a 5-year contract where you don't get to participate in a price increase.
So there's people in this room from all over the United States. We have different soil types, environments, everything from the Blackland Prairie to the Chihuahua Desert, whatever. This may be a little too technical. Can you describe the ideal conditions for carbon storage versus the less than ideal conditions? Rainfall, soil types, cover crop types, et cetera, et cetera.
So get turned off.
There's the top.
Okay, can you hear me? No.
Batteries must be.
Something, it's red. Red is.
Tap it again,
Might be the battery.
the button.
Hello? No. The battery's blinking. Okay. The battery sign. Okay, I want to say that there's a really great resource that the Environmental Defense Fund and the Woodwell the Climate Research Center put together in 2021. It's an analysis on the soil carbon credit programs. It's a really great read. It's a really great summary of all that we're talking about. So I just want to put that out there, the Environmental Defense Fund 2021. One thing that they say in there, and this is a reality in talking about all the different soil types and the different ecozones that are represented here, for example, carbon, statistically significant carbon accrual in the soil can take from 11 to over 70 years. Okay, so we're talking, and this is across all these different soil types, and that is an exact quote from the Environmental Defense Fund's report. So the more arid, so carbon and water flow together, think of it like that. So the more arid environment that you're in, the slower you're going to be storing carbon. And that's the main, I would say the main driver. We can also look at the amount of nitrogen that you have in your soils, and that can be management based, or it could be just the nature of the plants that you have growing, whether it's crops or whether it's native plants, and also a case of your microbial community composition. So we are talking about carbon, which is like one little atom, right? That's in this huge system, this huge, beautiful system of nature, right? So we've got microorganisms, and we've got insects, and we've got arthropods, and we've got plants, and we've got phosphorus and potassium and all the things that we all work with, and everything interacts together. So it's really, I just want to point it out that to talk just about carbon is important, because carbon is important, but it's very tied to so many other factors. And it's a very slow moving nutrient in long-term storage. So one more thing about carbon is that in shallow soils, carbon, there's different kinds of carbon also. So in shallower soils, and this is something to pay attention to when you're looking at the protocols that you would be engaging in, is that shallow soil, the carbon is being kind of turned over, respirated, cycled, and more kind of rapidly. In deeper soils is where you actually have a different kind of carbon, more of it, where it's sticking around for longer. It's more of a permanent carbon. There are technical terms for this, but I'm just trying to explain it. So in the soil sampling, it's important to understand, are you sampling shallow, or are you sampling deep? Are you sampling both? And then, you know, what eco kind of region or climate region are you in? Because that's gonna all have an effect on the potential of the soil to sequester carbon or to store carbon, and have that carbon be measurable accurately, and that's a whole other can of worms.
So if you're in one of these really arid environments, like say Nevada, where carbon is just not being stored at the abundance it is elsewhere, is there anybody looking at the amount of carbon that we're not releasing into the atmosphere through fire? You know, particularly on these big cheatgrass areas where we use targeted grazing to prevent fires.
Yes.
And mostly, can somebody pay me for it?
Yeah.
I don't know, so my expertise is not into all of he might know better than me, but the different products out there, but there are avoided conversion. So that would be the one that pops into my head. So there is a carbon program for simply avoided conversion. So I think it's 10 years. Do you know more about this than me? It's by the Climate Action.
I'll interrupt you.
So avoided conversion would be an option for someone who isn't accruing carbon measurably or fast enough. And then that simply keep your grassland in grassland, keep your range in range. And that is a program that is out there on the market. And she's had her hand up for a while.
Yeah, just one question. All right, so I'm from the upper Midwest up in North Dakota. And right now they're doing a carbon capture pipeline, a 2-foot pipeline, or 2 foot in diameter, to go ahead and sequester it and bury it under the ground. But we all know that we need carbon to grow our plants. And so why is there a multi-billion-dollar companies, and they're private, by the way, using taxpayer money to subsidize these private entities in the billions of dollars to sequester carbon, and yet you guys are willing to pay us to just store the carbon, you know, in our ground? Great idea, but we need that. We need the nitrogen in our soil, etc. So why are these other companies burying it, and you're going to pay people to go ahead and just, you know, let's do it naturally and keep that carbon in our soil?
Because of the Inflation Reduction Act, raise that 45Q credit that those companies get for permanently storing that carbon down in a trap geologic formation to $80 per metric ton.
Yeah.
So whereas, well, and that's $80, plus it goes up with inflation now. So whereas so we have two, it all goes back to these companies need to offset and, not to, the science, what you're saying is, hey, we need carbon. There's a reason there's a carbon cycle. That's how our earth works, the rest of it. But all goes back to climate change, which is everybody's decided that carbon is to blame for climate change. We need to stop climate change. How do we do that? We take less, we get rid of the C that's up in the atmosphere. So how do we do that? Well, you can have insetting, which is, hey, within our company, we're going to try to reduce our carbon footprint. But all these companies, whether you look at like Google, at the bottom of Google's homepage, it says carbon neutral since 2007. Well, obviously Google has tons of server farms. You go buy an airline ticket and you can, oh, hey, do you want your flight to be carbon neutral? Well, obviously a flight's not carbon neutral. They're burning tons of avgas. How do we actually get carbon neutral? Well, then they go buy an offset from somebody. So that offset is now coming from, either nature-based, which is what we're talking about with soil carbon. So just improving on natural systems, but mankind being mankind and all the politicians and then all the lobbyists in Washington, why not come up with an engineered solution where everybody can, in theory, make money off of it? And so the engineered solution is this carbon capture and underground storage, where we are capturing emissions, in this case, the reason that it's coming from, it's coming from ethanol plants. And then we're going to go stick this carbon down in the earth and hope that it never comes up again.
Or get into your water supply, your water table, or even get any moisture because it turns to some kind of acid. I can't remember the term for it. It's horrible.
Yeah. So that's why there is the engineered solution. Or really the why is because, it was passed as part of because of politicians and because of lobbyists.
Good.
And it's our taxpayer money paying for that crap. It's a Ponzi scheme, you guys, in the billions of dollars.
What about farm ground? You have carbon contract on farm ground, correct?
Yes.
What if they have, say a corn crop, they have a failed corn crop? They wouldn't be able to shift that under, correct? Because
It depends on what you sign up for. So within our row crop contracts, we have reduced tillage, we have cover cropping options, and we also have reduction in nitrogen. And so if you have a failed corn crop and you end up disking it under and you're not violating your tillage contract because you didn't sign up for a tillage contract, we don't care. You're putting biomass into the ground that's going to be chewed up by a microbe that's going to be stored.
right.
The flip side of that too is if you happen to have a failed corn crop and you have to disc it under in order to be able to plant the following crop, that's okay. You're still not violating your contract.
Just a question.
Yes.
We got another one right there.
Yeah, I have a question just to clarify in my mind. I understand what you were talking about, the carbon credits being used to offset carbon emissions from other airlines or whatnot. I understand that. So I have you come out here and you put up these solar panels and you pay me for 80% of the carbon that's stored. Is that correct? Am I understanding that right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
We're having mixed contracts here.
No solar.
There's no solar with grassroots or Agora. This is a research project for solar right now.
Okay, well, I guess what I was leading up to, if I get paid for carbon, it's no longer my carbon, is it? And so what happens if legislature comes along here in about year 14, and those nasty old dirty beef producers need to show carbon reduction, I don't have that carbon to offset my carbon.
Yeah.
Right? Or am I thinking right, or am I off here?
And advertise yourself as a low carbon footprint, because you've really gotten rid of all your carbon.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. You don't, but I would argue there probably a large percentage of the producers out there aren't actually storing carbon in their operations. And we'll see, again, it comes back to, this soil science that has yet to be determined, how much carbon is actually being stored. I hear that from a lot of landowners. Oh, I don't want to get in because I'm what if
Fearful of
Yeah.
the unknown.
And I can't never say never, but I think it very unlikely that there be a situation where that landowner is all of a sudden penalized because they went ahead and contracted that carbon. The other thing that I'll add to that is, okay, if you're in one of these soil carbon storage contracts, that means you're doing regenerative practices. You're way ahead of, like I said, probably 80%, more like 90% of the other producers out there. And you were actually doing something about it. So I just turn around and say, okay, so what? I'm not, carbon neutral because I already contracted it out. You all were the one, if that's really the argument that's being made, then all of a sudden the solar and everything else that we're doing for, to reduce carbon footprint, now all of a sudden you're in bed with or you're in the same group as all those people, and now they're all to blame too. It's just we're pulling in too many people in too many different industries for you actually to be on the hook at that point, is my thought on it.
Speaking of the hook, we're getting it. Just one last question, because now I have this. I'm scared to be an early adopter, and it leads me to this question: as the technology gets better and more advanced to cheapen up the measurements, how does that affect the contracts?
I'll go ahead and jump in there. So if you guys pay attention to soil science or new technology, there is technology that they're trying to utilize to speed up soil sampling and have real-time sampling, which is huge for the soil world at large. Also, there's a lot of technology in the fertility world for this type of technology and readings right now. That is where our main cost is in soil sampling. Back to the young gentleman who mentioned different soil types that was sitting up here earlier. The more soil types you have, the more we have to soil sample, the cost goes up, right? And we front load that at Agora, we pay for them. But as technology gets better and sampling gets cheaper, that will mean more money in the producer's pocket because we have more money to give you because our costs are covered in the future, which is really, really exciting.
So early adopters would kind of.
Early adopters with the way that the contracts work, like let's say in 4 years, we change our sampling protocol and we save money that's going to be able to go back to you in the price per ton per acre.
Yeah, so for us, soil sampling cost, there's no markup, anything like that. So there's a contracted maximum for soil sampling, measurement verification. So we won't go over that, but there's no minimum. So if this technology comes out tomorrow and our soil sampling in year 5 goes from an example, $4 an acre to 50 cents an acre because they have new technology.
Please.
Right?
Please.
Then the cost, the invoices roll straight across the way that they put in year 1. I mean, if costs go down, the revenue share goes up. So it's.
Are the invoices showed straight across when you sell the carbon cube?
Yes. I had to think about what you asked. Yes. Yeah, we share all of our invoices with you, all of our costs with you. We share your data. Grassroots Carbon and your ranch jointly own your data. We don't own your data. We jointly own it together. You own it, we own it. So that's we give you everything that you could want. What you do with it, we just ask you don't go sell your carbon data to Agoro and probably vice versa.
And don't enroll the same land with grassroots, because then we're all in a no-no for that one.
Yeah, so you can only sell it one time. We just ask, we jointly own the data together.
In these carbon contracts, clear across the board, the front runners in this game are trying to be very transparent with our producers that we're speaking with. And we spend a lot of time answering questions just like this, even with the people who are enrolled. And we make sure that it is crystal clear.
We have a final word from Anna Claire.
I do want
And then the hook is real.
Okay, I do want to say one thing. Think of it as like a bull sale. Okay, and you've got your book and you've got the EPDs that are important to you because your operation is unique. The same way your land is unique. It's different than your neighbors. It's different than the folks across, the state line or across the other side of the mountains. So not one, program or not one approach to environmental markets. And I say environmental markets because it's not just about carbon. There are also opportunities with biodiversity. There are opportunities coming up regarding water. There are opportunities that are practice-based that aren't gonna measure carbon, but they're looking at practices like cover cropping or adaptive grazing and things like that. So there are many, many different options, just like when you go to the bull sale. So you've got to look at your land, your family, your operation, your values, and what's important for you, and find the team or the expertise to support you in this world that's maybe out of your own expertise, and find what's gonna work for you. And you do have that control, and there's never been so much money coming from places like Microsoft and Google into dirt, right? Like, no one, I did it on purpose. I said dirt on purpose for her. So there, you know, that is a positive thing. So there's never before been so much money coming into this and available to folks who know about carbon, whether it's, but it may be by a different word. You know, growing grass is all about nutrient cycling, and water cycling, and that's what y'all all do. This is just twisting language, it's twisting the perspective, and if you can find the people to help you, this could be a really great opportunity. But I want to just end with one word, and that is integrity. And to me, that is the most important thing. You might have heard of the word, you know, greenwashing. And so if we are greenwashing and we're cutting corners and we're not doing what we're saying we're doing, no one's winning. So if really the heart of this whole thing is about, you know, helping the environment, sustaining, you know, the climate or mitigating climate and all of those kinds of things, whether you believe it or not, that is what this is meant to be about. And if we aren't really doing what we're saying we're doing, then we have no integrity in the programs. And so I think that that is a word that we should be talking, you know, using more of and talking about, because it's really about down the road, right? And what are our, you know, kids and grandkids going to be looking back and saying about what we're doing today?
Thank you. Sooner or later, this is gonna be.
The hook.
Yeah, the hook is real. Sooner or later, this is gonna be a major part of, at least something to think about on all of our places. So please thank these experts. Reach out to them if you have any more questions. I know their cards are up there, and we'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Also, a big thank you to Good Grazing Makes Cent for putting this part on. Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah,
you got cooler and more clothes.
Cool. All right.
Got the dead one.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. One more time, that's a lot of information, very useful. Again, I appreciate all the expertise that we've had. Gonna invite Whitney, our Vice President of US Cattlemen up here. We're gonna summarize a little bit of the meeting we've had. We're gonna find out who wins a Kubota and who gets $1,000. Mary, I know who it's not. Just saying. But I think an outstanding meeting, and I'm gonna let Whitney have a few comments, and then I'll make a few and we'll see who wins.
Thank you, Justin. Yes, so we have had an amazing time here in Texas. We've had wonderful hosts. Thank you, Chuck, for, you know, rounding up the best of Texas to bring into our meeting. And we're looking forward to seeing everyone at our summer meeting in Billings this summer.